Tonight, Sky News understands that the Home Office Minister, Robert Jenrick, is quitting after the government publishes its new legal plan to deport migrants to Rwanda. The Prime Minister is insisting he's gone as far as he can legally, but it appears one of his own ministers, the man fronting the bill, has gone because he doesn't agree. Also tonight, Boris Johnson admits to the COVID inquiry that his government vastly underestimated the threats of the virus. And Lord David Cameron has arrived in Washington, D.C. for his first visit there since returning to government as Foreign Secretary. We'll be speaking to him in the next hour. All that and more with Sonia Sodha and Robert Colvile, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday. I'm Sophy Ridge. We're live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. What an evening. You do not want to go anywhere because we're going to have an hour of political news as we understand, Sky News understands, that the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, has told friends he has resigned. The Immigration Minister, the man fronting the Rwanda bill. Now, that is after the publication of that emergency legislation designed to disapply section of the Human Rights Act. It's effectively to try and make sure that flights to Rwanda take off before the next election and before anything can happen to try and thwart those flights. Now, I sat in this very studio and I spoke to Robert Jenrick when the Supreme Court ruling said that the plan was unlawful. I asked him directly, will flights to Rwanda take off before the next election? This is his answer. Is a flight with asylum seekers going to take off to Rwanda before the next election?
Yes, we must do. That's what the public want. That's what we've set out to achieve. We're obviously disappointed by the judgment. We don't agree with it, and we certainly don't agree with some of the evidence that was brought forward by the UNHCR and others, but we respect the judgment, and we haven't sat idly on our hands in recent months. I prepared a comprehensive Plan B with the former Home Secretary, and I've been negotiating a treaty with the government of Rwanda.
I mean, you can see him there really committing his political future to the success or not of the Rwanda scheme. Sky's political editor, Beth Rigby, is with us here. I mean, look, MPs, politicians, everyone in Westminster will be chewing over the detail of the bill. But if Robert Jenrick, the guy selling it, the guy forming it, the guy behind it, is resigning, I mean, it's game over.
And just to be clear, there's no official confirmation yet from Number 10 nor the Home Office that Robert Jenrick has resigned, but I've just been texted by a close ally of his saying he has definitely resigned. And Laura Farris, a minister, says that she understands as well that he has resigned, although she said that she was basing that on a report. So just to be clear, no official confirmation, but we believe he has resigned. And what a moment. Sophie, we were talking last night about the divisions in the party, that whatever Rishi Sunak set down as his solution to the Rwanda problem, that it would cause controversy. And there were reports that on the One Nation side of the Conservatives, the moderate mainstream, that cabinet ministers were threatening to resign. But we also knew on the right of the party, as I wrote about yesterday, that Robert Jenrick was on resignation watch because he strongly believed that the only way those flights could get off the ground was to pull out of European human rights obligations. Rishi Sunak, his once close ally, has declined to do that. And it appears that because of that, he has walked. And this is really blowing up Rishi Sunak's plan now to push this legislation through. His immigration minister gone, and the former Home Secretary, you know, as soon as the legislation coming out saying that this is not good enough.
It's extraordinary. You were saying there about the fractures within the Conservative Party. Rishi Sunak tonight, or earlier this evening, talking to the 1922 Committee of Backbenchers, where he reminded them that he said, unite, we have to unite or die. I mean, it doesn't feel like this is a party uniting, does it?
He's taken the calculation that this close to a general election, that the Conservative Party will not change leader again. I have to say there are reports, people have said to me, about more letters going in to the 22. You've got, look, Sophie, on each side of the party, the splits are so open, they're deep, they're unpleasant. There's 100 on the moderate mainstream in the One Nation. There's about 100 MPs on the right of the party. The hope of Number 10, I was talking to someone in Number 10 about the legislation today. They said that what they hoped is that when it came out, they could convince the bulk of the party to hang with it so that they could kind of shave off the rebellions, so that they could bring it down below a number that, yeah, they'll have, a dozen or so on the right of the party that might not like it, but they avoid resignations of One Nationers, and they might be able to eke it through. Robert Jenrick's resignation, as you said, the standard bearer now within the party on the immigration plan that was set in train by Suella Braverman, that has really blown that up. And, the question is, what level of following will he and Braverman now build in the Commons? But for those MPs wondering about whether or not this, to pardon the pun, legislation will fly, they will be looking at the immigration minister resigning over it and be deeply concerned that the Prime Minister has, they would argue, pulled his punches and can't get the flights off the ground. To put it into context, I messaged a former cabinet minister last night saying, after I'd done my live in the 10 and I said it was all going to blow up, and I thought, I'd just check. I texted a former cabinet minister and I said, just to be clear, you don't think that flights will get off the ground by next spring, the Prime Minister? And he sent me a laughing emoji.
There you go. Beth, thank you very much indeed. Extraordinary evening here in Westminster. As Beth was saying, there is sort of two fractious halves of the party on the right and the left. And it does feel to me as if this bill may have alienated both sides for very different reasons. Let's take a look now, shall we? This is Sky's Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates' report on a very fast-moving day and how we got there.
Trying and failing to send migrants here to Rwanda, the biggest sore of Rishi Sunak's government. This woman, one of 4 Home Secretaries who tried to get the scheme off the ground. 3 weeks after she was sacked, demanding the PM make it happen.
It is now or never. The Conservative Party faces electoral oblivion in a matter of months if we introduce yet another bill destined to fail. Do we fight for sovereignty, or do we let our party die?
Can your Rwanda plan be saved, Prime Minister? Are you ready for a rebellion from your own MPs?
The Prime Minister insists he's committed to the plan. Today, he and Home Secretary James Cleverly publishing emergency legislation they say will get the planes off the ground.
Decision makers, which both the Home Secretary and immigration officers and the courts must all treat Rwanda as a safe country.
He says that international human rights law won't be able to stop people being sent to Rwanda.
Where the European Court of Human Rights indicates an interim measure relating to the intended removal of someone to Rwanda under or purportedly under a provision of immigration acts, a minister of the Crown alone, and not a court or tribunal, will decide whether the United Kingdom will comply with those interim measures.
The opposition scathing.
Well, this is total chaos in the government and in the Conservative Party. This is the desperate, dying days of a party ripping itself apart, clearly totally out of ideas, lost any sense of leadership or direction.
But now MPs and lawyers must decide whether this proposed law will really make a difference.
Influential members of the Tory right tell me they're already worried. This legislation does not go far enough. It's a moment of huge peril for Rishi Sunak. Past Tory Prime Ministers undone by letters of no confidence, but this one at the mercy of legislation. Downing Street already losing 1 vote this week, their first, and something that in the grand scheme of things didn't matter. They lose one on migration. Who knows what the future holds for the Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister has said repeatedly he wants to stop the boats. We all support him in that. But if he wills the ends, he must will the means.
If Rishi Sunak comes up with a fudge in this legislation, do you think it could be the end of his premiership?
I refer the right honourable gentleman to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Things about to get worse. No sign this evening of the hardline immigration minister, Robert Jenrick. Friends say he's quit. Will he be the first of many to take a stand? Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Now, we told you it was going to be a fast-moving evening of news, and just as that report by Sam Coates was playing, we have had confirmation from no other than the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, in the House of Commons, that Robert Jenrick, Immigration Minister, his number 2, has resigned. So we have that officially confirmed now by the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, that the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, has resigned on the very day that the bill he's been trying to shepherd, he's been trying to create, the Rwanda bill, has been published in its draft form to MPs. Now, I have to say, it felt to me, really since this morning, that this was going to be one of those significant days for Rishi Sunak's premiership. Not only that, but on the date of the next election. Forget the idea of letters of no confidence going in. The big problem is whether or not Rishi Sunak has a party that he cannot govern, that he cannot get legislation through. Already this week, 2 big rebellions on completely disparate issues, on vehicle emissions, for example, and on the contaminated blood bill. And now, a bill that the very own minister can't get through the House of decided that he can't get through the House of Commons, that he is resigning over. It feels to me as if the odds on a spring election have rocketed up this evening. Now, I had been expecting to speak to the Home Office Minister, Laura Farris, right now, but we have been told that she now no longer has time in her diary for that interview. In the last few minutes, though, I did speak to Danny Kruber. He is a leading light on the right of the party, to get his reaction to the plans. I should say I did this interview just before the confirmation of Robert Jenrick's resignation. You'll understand what I mean when you listen. Thank you so much for being on the programme tonight. First things first, what do you make of the Rwanda bill published today?
Well, it was only published an hour or 2 ago, so I haven't been able to make a considered view yet, and I'm going to be working with colleagues and with legal advisors on that in the coming days. But I'm encouraged by the headlines. I think it's really important that the government has asserted in absolutely unequivocal terms that the law of Parliament is sovereign, that no international treaties or previous laws or conventions can trump a parliamentary statute, and that is the essential principle that we need to assert. They're also making clear through the new treaty with Rwanda that people who are removed there will not be removed on to other countries, which of course was the concern in the Supreme Court. So I'm encouraged by what we've heard so far, but we need to look closely at the detail.
It's not exactly encouraging, is it, that we're understanding that the Immigration Minister, the guy who's fronted this bill, who's been on the studios defending it, Robert Jenrick, is resigning?
It's not good. I've only just heard this, and I haven't yet seen the reasons that Robert's given, but I am concerned about that because he's been an excellent immigration minister. He's been championing in government and in cabinet for the tough measure that I think we need.
I mean, he's not convinced by the bill. He's not convinced by the bill.
Well, exactly. So we need. No. Well, I haven't yet heard what his reasons are. I need to understand what it is that he objects to, and as I say, I need to look closely at it myself, as do the colleagues that I work with. So it's too soon to make a definitive judgment on the bill. I agree it's very concerning and unfortunate that the immigration minister, who I have great respect for, has chosen to leave government today. That's a bad sign, but as I say, I need to look closely at the bill to understand whether I think it'll work.
You say that one of the things that you're encouraged by is that the bill deals with one of the Supreme Court's concerns was that people could be returned to their country of origin. But does this not lead to quite an extraordinary circumstance where if you're a successful asylum seeker, then you stay in Rwanda? If you're unsuccessful, then you come back to the UK?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, the treaty actually allows everybody who goes to Rwanda to be settled there. So I don't expect that we'll be receiving many people back. So the arrangement is that Rwanda is happy to receive the people who come illegally to the UK and to make a new life in Rwanda, whether they're there as asylum seekers or not. But the most important thing, Sophie, if I can emphasise, and this is the crucial point about this, people do not want to be sent off to Rwanda. They're trying to get to the UK, and I understand why that should be, but I'm afraid we won't have them. So what needs to happen is that people who do arrive here illegally are swiftly detained and swiftly removed. That will have an enormous deterrent effect, as we've seen with other schemes which have caused the flow of migrants, illegal migrants from, for instance, Albania, to dry up to almost nothing because we started removing Albanians straight back to their own country. So deterrence works. If people understand that they're going to be shipped off to Rwanda if they arrive here illegally, then they will stop coming. That is the purpose of this. It's not to outsource all, tens of thousands of people a year to Rwanda. It's to stop people crossing the English Channel and to try and get to this country illegally.
There's another potentially big problem with it, and that's the Rwandans getting cold feet themselves. The government of Rwanda putting out a statement this evening to say it's always been important to both Rwanda and the UK to act lawfully. Without lawful behaviour by the UK, Rwanda would not be able to continue with the Migration and Economic Development Partnership. It sounds an awful lot like they're worried about the UK government breaking the law, and they're basically saying if that happens, then they'll pull out.
Well, what I detect there is an agreement on the part of the Rwandan government to support the UK government in making the case for this bill, and I respect that. But the fact is, this will be lawful. That's the definition of the rule of law in the United Kingdom, is that Parliament is sovereign and acts of Parliament have supremacy, and therefore the rule of law is conformed with when Parliament passes a bill. So, of course, it will comply with the rule of law. It will also, in our view, comply with international law, with the European Convention. So, but the question is, if the European Court decides it doesn't, what do we do about that? And the bill, I'm glad to say, asserts that we will make our own judgment, because we are not going to be bound by international legal rulings if the sovereign parliament of the UK has spoken. So I'm not concerned by what the Rwandan government has said. I understand it, and I'm confident that we will comply with the rule of law, because that's the premise of a parliamentary statute.
Just finally, Rishi Sunak has made this the defining issue of his premiership in many ways. If he can't get this right, if he can't bring his backbenchers with him, if it doesn't work, is it over for him?
Listen, I am really confident that the party will be able to come together in the right place. It's really, really difficult. I have great respect for why people are worried about apparent breaches of international law. They want us to maintain our good reputation abroad. I think we can and will do that by passing an act of Parliament which asserts the legality of what we're doing. I think the Conservative Party will come together in the right place on this. It's absolutely essential that we do unite and go into the next election as one party on one platform. I think we need to get into the right place so that we can fight an election as a united party, and that place is where the country wants us to be, where the public is, wanting control of our borders, wanting to stop the boats. And that's what the government's committed to doing. That's what all my colleagues want to do, and I'm hopeful that we'll get there.
OK, I know you've got to go and vote, so I'm going to let you go and do that. Thank you very much for making time for us this evening.
Thank you.
Well, let's pick up with our guest, shall we? The chief leader writer for The Observer, Sonia Sodha, and the director at the Centre for Policy Studies think tank and Sunday Times columnist, Robert Colvile. I bet you guys thought you would talk about Boris Johnson at the COVID inquiry when you got the call up for this evening.
Right? I mean, I think Boris Johnson is going to be extremely pleased to be knocked off tomorrow's front pages.
Boris Johnson at the COVID inquiry, Nigel Farage topless in the jungle, Suella... I mean, even just Suella savaging the Prime Minister, yet again, all been wiped off the headlines.
It's extraordinary. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick resigning on the day that... I mean, it's his bill. I think we can call it that. It's been published. I mean, what does that tell us?
Well, I think it's like you were saying earlier, Sophie, it shows what a divisive issue this is for the Conservative Party. And I'm reminded a little bit, actually, of Theresa May and Brexit, where she couldn't find a solution that kept her very divided party happy. If she sort of tweaked one thing, it might satisfy one wing of the party, but it would upset another wing. And I sort of feel like Rishi Sunak's in the same position when it comes to stopping the small boats and the Rwanda policy, which is that there are lots of people who will think this bill is way too harsh. And there is lots in his party who think that it doesn't go far enough. And that's quite apart from the practical issues, which is that there are lots of lawyers who think, well, A, this has got no chance of getting through the Commons and the Lords before the next election because the Lords will disagree. But B, even if it was to pass, there's still going to be lots of challenges in the court. So there is just so much conspiring against Rishi Sunak here, but he can't even get over the first hurdle.
It feels like there's a lot of similarities with Theresa May, but one crucial difference. Theresa May didn't ask for Brexit to be the defining issue of her premiership, and yet Rishi Sunak has decided to make Rwanda the defining issue of his. I mean, was that a mistake?
Well, it wasn't exactly something he had a choice over. You could see that concern about immigration, concern about small boats,
concern
was rising up.
Gone up an awful lot more since you started talking about Rwanda every day.
In fact, among Conservative voters and among Leave voters, it is now viewed as the most important issue
they spent a year talking about Rwanda.
Which is quite extraordinary. It's not the NHS, it's not the economy, it's not cost of living. This is a huge issue to a big swathe of the Tory voting base. And I think what we're seeing is something I wrote about in my column a couple of weeks ago, which is there's a polarisation within the Tory party in terms of attitudes to institutions. There are some people, and I think Rishi Sunak probably counts as one, who, he will do anything to stop the boats, but he won't do that. He will disoblige section. The bill actually does disoblige sections of the Human Rights Act. It goes absolutely as far as you can, and probably a little bit further in terms of challenging the legal regime, in terms of pushing. But what Suella asked for in her resignation statement, she explicitly called for the government to abandon, and I'm quoting here from memory, but all relevant international relevant international legislation and obligations, plus a whole list of other things like judicial review or whatever that could hold it down. That's a kind of a really fundamentalist thing. And Damien Green, who's on the left of the party, described that as the least conservative statement he'd ever heard, and something that Xi or Putin would do. So you have this enormous tension. And I think the really interesting thing here is the figure of Robert Jenrick. I mean, you've referred to him as a right-wing figure or a hardliner, but that's not who he.
The face of the bill.
Yeah, he's the face of the bill. But back in the day, it was Rishi Sunak, Oliver Dowden, and Robert Jenrick who jointly wrote an op-ed in the Times saying only Boris can save our party. That was taken as the signal that the moderate, the ambitious, sensible, competent, technocratic cast of the party would get behind Boris, would get behind Brexit, and it kind of eased his path to becoming leader. So, and Jenrick was originally put in the Home Office to keep an eye on...
To keep an eye on Suella, right? To be the Rishi Sunak's eyes on her, see how that has gone down. What do you think this means for the authority of Rishi Sunak tonight? Because, he knows it's a difficult issue. Yeah. He addressed the 1922 committee. Where does it leave him?
Well, it's already been leaching away, and you've been able to see that with resignations, etc. I think the truth is that it's very, very difficult for a Prime Minister to govern if he or she can't keep a party together in the Commons, because that is essentially what governing means. It means passing legislation, in the House of Commons. And if you start to see lots of rebellions, that very much leaches away at the Prime Minister's authority. And I think the issue he's got is there are now so many Conservative MPs who don't believe they can win the next election. They're kind of like, well, what's the point? Why should we do what the Prime Minister tells us to do? And that is a really toxic spiral for a party to be locked into. Once MPs don't believe that their party's going to win the next election, they sort of feel like they can do whatever they want, and it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think it bodes very, very badly for us. But I still don't think we're at the stage where we're going to see a leadership election quite yet, because I think even the sort of most hardline Conservative MPs know that to put another Conservative Prime Minister before the electorate would be seen as bonkers by a lot of people. But, it does leave Rishi Sunak kind of just left there in suspension as this Prime Minister who just can't simply, command the support of his parliamentary party. It's a really troubling position for him.
Do you agree with Sonia? Are things that bad?
I think that's actually an exaggeration. It's easy to remember, but Boris's government essentially fell because he couldn't govern, because there was rebellion after rebellion after rebellion. Actually, the votes this week were the first time, I think, that Sunak's government has been defeated. And admittedly, that's partly because they haven't been bringing that many controversial issues to the floor. Liz Truss, again, her government collapsed because of this, finally collapsed because of this chaotic vote over fracking, I think it was. So it's not a new thing that the Conservative Party is fractious and rebellious.
But if you say that is what led to the downfall of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, do you think this is the early signs that Rishi Sunak could be going the same way?
I think they would be absolutely mad to get another leader in.
It would be mad, but madder things could happen, right?
And it may be that we just end up in election territory sooner rather than we think, if it is ungovernable. And I agree, to be honest, I can't see another leadership election. But I think you could see, if it's ungovernable, then he falls into an election earlier than he wants.
Well, I mean, the government ultimately has control over what it brings forward to the House, so you can duck a lot of fights.
Really interested to talk to both of you on what is a A big night of news, should we say, here in Westminster. Thank you. Now, we've been talking an awful lot about the politics and, of course, about that resignation. But let's talk a little bit more about the bill now, shall we? The government's actual Rwanda plans. Now, a lot of famous legal eagles have been going through the details since it was published a few hours ago. And just before the news about Robert Jenrick came through, I spoke to the former Shadow Attorney General, Baroness Chami Chakrabarti. Thank you so much for being on the programme this evening. What do you make of the bill that's been published tonight?
Well, thank you, Sophie. So this has been long-trailed and anticipated, and you and your viewers will know that it has been billed as semi-skimmed or full-fat. Well, my reading of the bill is that it is neither. This is nuts. This is not milk of any kind. This is nuts. This is a bill that will satisfy nobody and infuriate everybody. For example, failed asylum seekers will come back to the UK from Rwanda, but genuine refugees stay in Rwanda. What kind of an incentive is that? Just saying. On the constitutional principle, this is two fingers to our Supreme Court. The Supreme Court found on the evidence that Rwanda wasn't safe, and so this bill says, sod the Supreme Court, Rwanda is safe, and tells the courts that international law doesn't matter. This is pretty serious from, a Chami Chakrabarti point of view, but from a right-wing, hard-right Tory point of view, it's not satisfying either, because we are still part of the European Convention on Human Rights, which means that people who can't get remedies in the UK courts can still go to Strasbourg. It's a mess. It's a mess, Sophie.
You mentioned there about the fact that we're going to still be part of the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights. It was quite interesting to see the statement put out by the government of Rwanda this evening to say about the importance of acting lawfully. Without lawful behaviour, they say, by the UK, Rwanda would not be able to continue with the partnership. Does that read a bit like a threat to you? Do you think they may have blocked the UK pulling out of the ECHR?
I have quite a lot of sympathy with the government of Rwanda, who've probably been led up the garden path with this dodgy deal with the UK. There may be some in Rwanda who are sort of rather regretting getting mixed up with this, because their own human rights record has been held to scrutiny in a way that they probably aren't completely ready for or comfortable with. And I don't know whether even the money involved is worth it to them. But the bottom line is they've done a dodgy deal with a far-right government that is about to go out of power, that is doing culture war instead of dealing with the tragedy of people being put into boats and the tragedy of so many people in a refugee crisis that is the biggest one since World War II.
What the government would say is that this bill intends to try and alleviate some of the concerns that the Supreme Court had about Rwanda being a safe country for asylum seekers. So, for example, meaning that they couldn't be returned to their country of origin if that wasn't the right thing to do. They think that actually this goes towards helping, some of the concerns raised by the Supreme Court.
I understand that argument, Sophie, I really, really do, but they produced a perverse outcome, which means that somebody who is not a genuine refugee will literally be sent back to the UK, and someone who is a genuine refugee will stay in Rwanda. I am in Alice in Wonderland world. SW1 is often compared to that, but this time it's for real.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Chami Chakrabarti. Chami Chakrabarti there, Labour peer, talking about her reaction to Rwanda. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Foreign Secretary David Cameron is in the US, urging continued support for Ukraine. He speaks to Sky News. And back here, the other big story of the day, Boris Johnson at the COVID inquiry and an apology from the former Prime Minister. That's next.
Lucia, do you know why you're here?
Bad luck, I guess.
I thought it was awesome. Honestly, it's so good to see after so long that we're going to be getting a new GTA. Super excited. And I think my entire community as well are also super excited to finally see something from the new GTA. Well, it's only really a teaser and it's obviously not showing any gameplay, but there's so many different things in there. And it's really interesting as well to see there looks like there's some sort of social media component in there. But yeah, I mean, it's just awesome to see it finally. In reality, it's probably, well, it's the closest we can get to reality, I think, with a game. I think that it's what GTA has always been so good at is taking real life and kind of going crazy with it. And you can see it in the trailer. There's actually some sort of parts in there that are reenactments of like real life clips that have happened. So I think it's that like connection to reality, but just going crazy with it, I think is what, people are always attracted to with it. I think I wanted to see it go crazier, go bigger. We already had a huge map in GTA 5. And clearly, I mean, I think it was also a dense and interesting world to actually play in. So I think it would be awesome to see this go even further with that and create sort of, a even bigger environment with all sorts of different things going on.
Hello, welcome back. Well, tonight we are talking about the breaking news that Robert Jenrick has resigned as Immigration Minister. In the last few moments, our producer Katie's just ran in with his resignation letter, hot off the press. Luckily, we've also got our political editor, Beth Rigby, who also ran in at the same time to talk us through what he says, because really, this is what everyone wants to know. Why has Robert Jenrick resigned on the very day that the bill he was working on has been published?
Yeah, and he's just put out his letter, and we should, I've just quickly read it. I mean, the point to make as well is that Robert Jenrick was once one of Rishi Sunak's closest allies. I mean, he was literally put into the Home Office partly to keep an eye on Suella Braverman, but tonight he resigns, and really the nub of it is a bit down in the letter where he says, in our discussions on the proposed emergency legislation, you have moved towards my position. Nevertheless, I'm unable to take the currently proposed legislation through the Commons, as I do not believe it provides us with the best possible chance of success. He describes the Prime Minister's bill as one of a triumph of hope over experience, and the stakes for the country are too high for us not to pursue the stronger protections required to end the merry-go-round of legal challenges which risk paralysing the scheme.
So, in other words, he thinks the bill should have been stronger. That's what you're saying.
The nub of it is that he believes that this bill will not be successful and it won't get flights off the ground. And it was interesting, when I was talking to someone who's very close to him a couple of days ago about him being on resignation watch, this person said to me, the thing is, Rishi Sunak thinks that Jenrick thinks like Rishi Sunak, and that all of the hard-line legislation on trying to get the planes off the ground that Suella Braverman was proposing, Sunak thought that was Braverman's idea, and what he's now found out is actually Jenrick was fully square behind Braverman. And he goes on in the letter, Sophie, where he said, we said we would stop the boats altogether. That is what the public rightly demands. We must truly mean that we will do it whatever it takes, quoting the Prime Minister back to him. When we say we'll do it. And this emergency legislation is the last opportunity the current drafting does not go far enough.
I was really struck when I interviewed Robert Jenrick after the Supreme Court decision, and he said, yes, flights are going to take off before the next election. He didn't explicitly say it, but I strongly felt he was saying the legislation would include pulling out of the European Convention on Human Rights.
Those around him, immediately after the Rwanda decision came from the Supreme Court, were making the argument that Suella Braverman had been making. And again, it was felt like this was Braverman's ideas and that it got transposed onto Jenrick. But that he has resigned over this shows that the strength of feeling, that he feels that he cannot carry the legislation through Parliament. He doesn't want to be responsible for what he thinks will be a failure. He might have an eye on what comes after Rishi Sunak, and is this a tilt at trying to take a position, go on to the backbenches? No, and have leadership ambitions, you know.
That's what we've got
He's
to be looking
showing
at now.
leadership on an issue with Braverman that will appeal to the right party. For a Prime Minister, for your immigration minister to resign, saying that the bill that you are just trying to sell to a very divided and sceptical party is going to work, and for your immigration minister that knows the details of all of this and has worked through the details, saying, I can't take the bill through the House, I don't need to tell you that is a massive problem for the Prime Minister. And I imagine he really tried to get Jenrick to stay. And isn't it interesting that all the talk last night was about the One Nation group and some of the cabinet ministers that might resign on that wing of the party? We know that Victoria Prentice, the most senior legal figure in government, and also Alex Talk, the Justice Secretary, were both quietly saying to the Prime Minister, do not pull out of international human rights obligations. And then the guy that walks is one of his most closest allies. He goes on to say, it's not a decision I arrived at lightly, but one born of principle. He says the PM will retain his full support on the back benches. The fortunes of the Conservative Party at the next general election are at stake. Exactly what Braverman said. What a lot of Conservative MPs that you talk to say, and you have to think now that there are two cheerleaders on the backbenches ready to lead a rebellion over the Prime Minister's decision not to withdraw from the European Convention.
And one Prime Minister whose authority has been severely undermined.
It's a sense of freefall tonight, and it will be interesting to see whether, to the extent to which the Prime Minister can scoop it up and carry on. But you've got to ask yourself, as happens less than 3 hours after he publishes the bill, whether this has any hope of flying at all through the Commons, because I can't see how he's going to get it through his benches.
It's extraordinary. It feels to me, Beth, we're going to be looking back on this day as a major turning point in the premiership of Rishi Sunak. Thank you very much indeed. Beth Riddick there, political editor. Next tonight, events in Ukraine and Gaza mean it's a busy time to be Foreign Secretary, but after a surprise return to government, David Cameron is said to be enjoying it. Well, today he is making his first visit to Washington in the new role to reaffirm the strength of the special relationship and reiterate US-UK support for Ukraine. In the last hour, he spoke to Sky News' Will Frost.
Lord Cameron, thanks so much for joining us on Sky News. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Good to be with you.
It's quite a change in recent weeks for you. You're back in government, Foreign Secretary no less, here on Capitol Hill in Washington, whilst your former friend stroke foe Boris Johnson's not in government and facing a grilling in the COVID inquiry. It's quite a turnaround.
Well, I think I did my appearance in front of the COVID inquiry, and it's important we find out, what things we could get better next time. The thing I would say is that it was the most difficult problem that I think any government's had to cope with since the war. So I don't look at what Boris has said or anyone else has said and think, oh, it was so easy, there was such an easy answer, we could have done this, we could have done that. It was incredibly difficult. And I think you do have to see everything through that lens.
Clearly you're here on Capitol Hill in large part to talk about Ukraine, just fresh from one meeting with more to come. Did you ever think that you'd have to come here to convince Republicans in the US to want to back a war against Russia?
I mean, look, things have changed, and that's partly because of, politics has changed. The big pressure on political parties all over the world caused by problems of migration, caused by problems of some of the effects of globalization, that's changed our politics. And so you have to accept what's there and work with it. I'm absolutely passionate that we must help Ukraine. This to me is the struggle of our generation. It's the most clear example of one country invading another, risking security on our continent. And the message I've been giving here is that A risk to European security is also a risk to American security. We know with Putin, if you don't stop him here, he will come back for more. And on the sidelines, enemies of America will be cheering. So I think it's a strong argument to make, and I feel it's going down well. But yes, it's challenging because you've got a lot of different opinions and a lot of people worried about domestic considerations and all the pressures there are with the crisis in the Middle East as well. But I think we've really got to focus on Ukraine and Russia. We've got to help this brave country withstand this appalling illegal aggression.
If this vote does not go the way that President Biden wants it to do, he was just making an address urging senators and congressmen to push it his way. Is it a sign that America, despite the willingness of its principle, is actually a less reliable ally for Europeans than in the past?
No, they are an extraordinary partner for us, and we've seen that whether we were fighting against ISIL in Iraq and Syria, all the struggles that we've been involved in, they are indispensable in that way. But I think you have to respect the fact, in Congress, the House is controlled by one party, the Senate is controlled by another. There's definitely a majority in here to back Ukraine, but it's made more complicated by the politics. And so you've just got to find that majority and get it through and get that money and get those weapons to the Ukrainians who so badly need them.
If you hear from Republican lawmakers here that the practical way out is a negotiated solution, Putin keeping some of the land he seized in 2014, what will you tell them?
Well, what I say to them is, look, of course, one day we have to, help bring this to an end. But right now, the task is to support Ukraine, to help them in this fight, to help them through the winter. And what I've been saying to them is, stand back and look at the Ukrainian success. They've pushed the Russians back across the Black Sea. They've opened a maritime route for trade, so they're trading and exporting again, and their economy is growing again. It shouldn't be for us to say to the Ukrainians, now is the time to make this proposal or that proposal. Right now, what we've got to do is back them.
I wanted to move on to the Middle East. And then a couple of days ago, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said, too many innocent civilians have died in Gaza. Do you think Israel needs to be more discriminate in what it's doing?
We've said right from the start and have said continually that, look, we back Israel's right to defend itself, to go after Hamas. This is a murderous terrorist organization. I saw for myself the terrible things that they did on October the 7th. But we have said that, Israel has to have a regard for civilian life. They have to obey international humanitarian law, and specifically as they started in the south, not to repeat the tactics in the north. We've made those points just as the Americans have, and we'll continue to do so. But fundamentally, I would make the point that of course, we want to see pauses so that aid can get in and hostages can get out. But if you look at it from Israel's point of view, or in fact the world's point of view, if you stop this and Hamas is still in control of part of Gaza, there can't be the long-term solution that we want. This is a murderous terrorist organization that wants to kill as many people as it can, that doesn't believe in Israel's right to exist, and it can't possibly be a partner for peace.
I'm sure you saw that President Erdogan of Turkey said earlier in the week that Prime Minister Netanyahu should face trial for war crimes. Presumably, you would agree that after this ends, that should take place. There should be an assessment of both sides whether war crimes have been committed.
Well, I think, look, if war crimes are committed, that should be charted right now. That's what international humanitarian law is all about. But it's not individual countries that should declare whether this crime or that crime has been carried out. It's for the international bodies that exist that chart and do these things. But there's a fundamental difference you have to remember, of course, that, Hamas whereas Israel uses its defences to try and defend its people, Hamas uses its people to try and defend its rockets. They have no regard for civilian casualties. They want as many civilian casualties as possible. So I don't see there's some sort of moral equivalence between the two. And Israel, it has to abide by international humanitarian law, and that's the point we keep making to it.
And thus far, you think they have?
Our assessment, we actually have to make repeated assessments. We're not some large supplier of goods and weapons to Israel, but even the small amount we do, we have to make sure that in our view, according to the experts, they are trying to and succeeding in following international humanitarian law.
Let's talk about China. Friend or adversary?
well, what they are is a epoch-defining challenge for our country. I mean, a lot has changed since I was Prime Minister. We did build a strong relationship with China based on trade and cooperation, and much of that was worthwhile, but things have changed. We've had the events in Hong Kong, we've had the treatment of the Uyghurs, we've had the sort of wolf warrior diplomacy, the treatment they meted out to friends of ours like Australia and Lithuania. So things have changed, and so it's right that our policy has changed, and we now want to meet this challenge by protecting ourselves more deeply in terms of against cyber attack and other potential hostile actions. We want to align with our allies, because we're much stronger if we work with partners like the United States. But yes, we still need to engage. And last week was a good example. I was at the COP meeting in Dubai to make sure we respond properly to the threat of climate change. We can't do that without China. So there are problems in the world that can't be solved without engagement with China. So there's necessary engagement that has to take place.
What do you see your role as here in the US on China? Because I think it's fair to say that the UK has been a follower of the US policy. When President Trump turned against China, Biden's reinforced that. Would you like to see things ease a little bit? And will you urge people to be, you used the word constructive yesterday for your meeting with the foreign minister? Or do you think it's about appropriate at the moment?
I think what it is a conversation between Britain and the United States that tries to align our interests and our approach to China, that recognises there's a big bit of that about protecting ourselves and making sure that we take the risks out of our relationship, as we did, for instance, when we took Huawei out of our telecommunications. But it is also about working about where we need to engage. I mean, President Biden recently had President Xi for a meeting in San Francisco, and part of that was about climate change, was about how do we try and make sure that these really big emitters of carbon set targets so that we can prevent dangerous global warming. That does require engagement. So I see where Britain can help is we have our own relationship with China, we have our own connections and contacts and history, and let's discuss that with America so that we can both protect ourselves but also engage where necessary.
When you had your meeting yesterday with your foreign secretary counterpart in China, and you have to strike this new tone because, as you say, the facts have changed. Is it awkward for you? Because you've started off as saying they're your friend in the golden era of friendship between the two countries, and in the years since you were Prime Minister, you've struck business deals there and been friendly on that level. So is it kind of an uncomfortable conversation for you?
Things have changed. I mean, it's still useful to have the connections and the contacts. I mean, the Chinese foreign minister is someone I've known for, I suppose, almost a decade. And
so you push back on you to say, where's this come from?
No. Well, we had a very good conversation, but I was very clear that, while we still wanted to engage, there were some things that had changed. And there were, one of the points, why do we have these relationships? I mean, obviously part of the point is so that you can talk about things you disagree about, as well as the things where you're trying to work together. And yesterday's conversation was a good example of that. There are some areas where we want to work together, particularly climate change and some of the trade issues. But there are other areas where we don't agree, where we want to raise issues, sensitive issues. But you have to have that relationship in order to do it. And the better you know someone and have a relationship with them, the easier it is to make those points.
And you're comfortable pushing them where necessary?
Yes, always have to. And that's not changed. Even during the golden era, where we had very strong relations with China, we would always raise human rights cases. We'd always raise individual cases. We never stopped doing that. And, the argument I made at the time, I'd still stand by, which is that if you have that relationship, you have those contacts and connections, you're able to raise those cases.
I wanted to touch on the government's recently announced update on its Rwanda migration policy. Suella Braverman said earlier that if Rwanda flights don't take off, it's electoral oblivion for the Conservatives. Is this policy just designed to win votes?
No, the policy is designed to deal with the problem of illegal migration. I mean, it's interesting being here in the United States where you meet with the Republicans and they talk about this issue of how many people have come illegally over the border. I think we have to sort of take a step back for a minute and realise that really high-profile illegal migration is incredibly destructive to public confidence in our immigration systems and in our politics as a whole. And that's why it's so important we address this. Now, what the Rwanda policy and other policies are designed to do is to stop the illegal, very visible migration of people coming in small boats from the north coast of France, arriving on the Kent coast, and never having to leave. And you can't put up with that. You have to stop that. You've got to stop the boats. And the way you do that is breaking up the people smugglers, breaking up the gangs, and effectively breaking their model. You've got to break the connection between getting in a boat, landing in Britain, and being able to stay. And that's what the Rwanda policy is all about. And, you know, what we've seen, and all credit to the Prime Minister, the treaty's been negotiated, the bill will be presented to Parliament, the pack of evidence about what is actually happening in Rwanda and all the changes they've made, and I've looked at that myself, will be published, because he is determined, and the government's determined, to deal with this problem of illegal migration.
Clearly this is a policy that divides opinion and it appeals more to the right than the left. Robert Jenrick, as we were discussing just before we recorded this interview, has just resigned because he doesn't think it goes far enough. Should the Prime Minister cater more to the right of the party?
Well, the Prime Minister will go on doing the right thing. That's one of the reasons I joined this government. I have great faith in Rishi Sunak, in his judgment and his values and the way that he runs the government. I'm sorry that Robert Jenrick has resigned. He was a good minister. But I think it's, in many ways, the background is we've just published an incredibly comprehensive set of proposals that are going to reduce the numbers of migration to the country. We've just managed to achieve, which many people thought we wouldn't, a new treaty with Rwanda, agreed, you know, inside a very small number of weeks, which many people thought would be impossible. We're going to publish a bill which is going to put this policy beyond doubt, and crucially there's a pack of evidence about all the things that Rwanda does to obey human rights and not to return people to countries that they shouldn't and all the rest of it. So I think actually it's just at the moment when these policies are being put in place.
Many people questioned the policies you disagree with when you rejoined this government. On this, on the moral point, taking people against their will to not just a third country, but a third continent, thousands of miles away. Morally, you're content to stand up next to that?
Well, the people who are going to be on this travel to Rwanda are people that have left a perfectly safe country in France, right? This is not people moving from, you know, Afghanistan to Pakistan. These are people moving from France to Britain. France is a safe country. And if you want to stop the boats, if you want to stop this illegal migration, you simply have to have a returns policy. I saw it when I was in office, actually, when there were huge numbers of people going from Turkey to Greece. And everyone thought that would never be stopped. But actually, once there was an agreement that anyone who arrived on a dinghy from Turkey to Greece went back to Greece and went back to Turkey, and the Turks would take them back, the numbers almost collapsed overnight. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, nobody wants lots of people to be flown to Rwanda. As soon as that policy is in place, I think the number of people coming across the channel in boats will radically reduce. And that's the aim, which is to stop people travelling illegally from one perfectly safe country, France, to another perfectly safe country, Britain.
As we wrap things up, Foreign Secretary, I want to just touch on the special relationship between the UK and the US and the extent to which you think that is a relationship between the two countries, or whether the individuals at the top influence it, something, of course, you have great experience of. And I ask this question with the fact that Donald Trump is currently the favourite to become president again. Just last night, he said that he would be willing to act as a dictator, albeit just for one day. He made clear again he wants to leave NATO at a critical time for NATO. Would that question the ability for the UK and the US to remain number one allies?
I think what we've seen over the years is you found that the special relationship, obviously it helps if there's some personal chemistry between Prime Minister and President, but we've seen it continue even when they're from different parties or even when they don't particularly agree, because the relationship goes very deep. It's about values, it's about our shared history, it's about language and culture. The special relationship exists in the many business relationships, the cultural relationships. It exists particularly, something I saw as Prime Minister, in the very deep intelligence relationships and military relationships that we have, and those continue and would continue whoever is president. But obviously the relationship is stronger when you can try and find policy agreements as well at the top.
I know we're out of time, Lord Cameron, but you're clearly enjoying being back in the saddle, albeit in the imperfect way from the House of Lords. There's an election coming up. Will you be seeking a seat in the Commons again?
No, I won't. I'm very happy. Look, I mean, I want to make sure I'm accountable to Parliament, and I am. Yesterday I did questions.
But you don't want to go
House
back in the Commons?
I don't want to go back into the Commons.
So it's a temporary role?
It's a role I hope I'll be doing after the election when we've won it. But I'm doing it from the House of Lords. The point I was trying to make is you are accountable as a Foreign Secretary in the House of Lords, but I'm very happy if we want to find other ways of people from the House of Commons asking me questions as well. Very happy to look at that too.
Will Frost there interviewing the newish Foreign Secretary David Cameron, one of his first interviews with a broadcaster there. Will Frost doing that one. Now, trust me, we're going to look back on today as one of the defining moments of Rishi Sunak's time in Number 10. He decided to put his Rwanda plan front and centre of his premiership, and as a result, front and centre of his pitch at the next election. So what happened tonight when the Rwanda bill was published was always going to be a massive moment. He needed to get his party on side, and then he needed to convince the public as well. But that plan was delivered a body blow when the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, resigned. The man who was the face of the bill, the man who toured TV studios like this one defending it, deciding he could defend it no longer. I just want to play you now the moment in the House of Commons when the Home Secretary, James Colvile, announced that Robert Jenrick had resigned.
I have, from this dispatch box and a number of other locations, said how much I value the work of the Immigration Minister. He has done a huge amount of work on this and a number of other areas. And I have said that in a number of areas which have driven down small boat arrivals by a third, the work that he has done has been instrumental.
The work he's done has been instrumental. Well, that is an understatement, really. Where next for the Rwanda plan? The Rwanda plan that Rishi Sunak has made such a centrepiece of his premiership. How can MPs support it when the Immigration Minister and the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, have both stood up today, both saying it's not going to work? But most importantly, where next for Rishi Sunak? Because his authority has been delivered a very, very difficult task today. Winning the next election was already looking like an uphill battle for the Prime Minister. And today, well, it has suddenly got an awful lot harder. Is the Conservative Party going to become ungovernable? Are they going to unite behind the Prime Minister? What happens in the next coming days are going to be absolutely essential. That is it from us tonight on what has been an extraordinary day in Westminster. I will see you tomorrow night at 7, where who knows where we're going to be there. Up next, though, it is Greg Milam with the UK Tonight, so do stay watching for more analysis of what it means for everyone in the UK.